Thank you very much indeed. Well, it's fantastic being with some old friends and memories of falling through thin ice, which I have done a few more times in my life. But I always remember asking my father what was the most interesting thing that happened to him at school. And he said, oh, I remember it was this French lesson. There was this French teacher always used to write along the board. It was a long board, and he always had this huge sweat mark under his arm. And anyway, it was normally incredibly boring, but one day a wasp landed on his armpit and everybody was suddenly transfixed. Anyway, apparently the wasp died before he got to the end of his writing. So, but I think, you know, what school was, and for me, Williston was incredibly important to give me a sense of what freedom was. And what I'd like to do this evening is to sort of show you some slides really of the sort of beliefs I have and why I think we need to think like nomads today. I mean, I don't know what you are, but I mean, I'm finding this whole COVID thing really rather exciting as structure, stability, security, certainty, entitlement, and arrogance are sort of proven to be delusions of an ill-informed mind. And I find this a really, really exciting time to actually have to recalibrate, rethink. And it's just how nomads have existed for thousands of years. So that's really sort of part of my beliefs. So I'll start with some slides, if I might, and then hopefully we can discuss if that's all right. So thank you. So I'll begin with some slides and just show you some of these are all my own photographs from different journeys of misadventure, I think they could probably describe as. But let me just start. So this is taken in Western Mongolia, and it just sort of shows this glorious sense of clarity and courage of the nomads. But as you can see, I am lying right between the two horses coming straight at me. And the fellow's just seen me, he's looking at me in the eyes, and I was looking through the camera. Anyway, that's how close the horses actually got to me, lying on the ground there. But anyway, I live to tell that tale. But what I've been sort of doing is taking myself and others on journeys and really enjoying it. But these experiences that I'm talking about have not come from academia. My knowledge has come from really people inviting me to sit around the fire with them, to talk and to learn from people who've been doing things for thousands of years. And from this, I've really been able to think about my own life and think about what is important. And for them, it is the knowledge of their territory. But taking people on these sorts of experiences, to put that record button of life on, and sort of to realize how much we need that sort of sense of adventure and that sense of humility and humanity, and to talk about where we are, and to realize that actually nothing much has changed. The question is, how do we obtain clarity? So what we do is we bring the Maasai from Kenya or elsewhere to sit down with executives and talk about values, to talk about purpose, and to talk about identity. And what I've discovered is whether I'm in Mongolia or whether I'm in East Africa, and more recently, I've been spending a lot more time in Mongolia because I've been joining the nomads on their migrations when they move their yaks and their goats and their cattle from winter to spring pastures. And this fabulous sensation of sort of crossing rivers and really understanding what it's like. And this is staying with some reindeer herders in northern Mongolia and learning from them about what are their priorities, what are their values, how do they make decisions. And it's a wonderful experience bringing executives from Australia and elsewhere to sit down in Mongolia and talk about how do you make decisions, and ultimately, how do you build a community? What is at the core of that community? And what I've discovered is really by sitting down with the nomads in East Africa, it's really around this clarity of what you need to know, but far, far more, it's how do you behave? And if you think of the nomads, you might say, well, what do they have? Well, they can manage $500,000 worth of cattle with just a few pots and pans, but a structure of everybody having that clarity. So I'd like to talk this evening really about my own journey and how I've come up with these ideas. And this is wandering into the deserts of Western China in Xinjiang. So there I am as a happy little boy growing up in East Africa. I'm 8th generation expatriate. My father was born in India. I was brought up in Africa. My children were all born in Japan. And I remember being with my father there and thinking, you know, what is important? And there I am at school at Harrow. And I was taken aside by my housemaster and I was told, let us make one thing absolutely clear. You are far, far, far too stupid to get a university. Would you like an exchange scholarship to Williston? And that or to America. And that's what it was. But one of my sort of loves at school, and it sort of took me away from the normal groups of people, was photography. And I used to love it. And some of you may remember at that time, there was a show called Hair. And it had nudity in it. It was hippies. It was everything else. And I went from Harrow and I went to watch this. And it taught me one of the most important lessons in life. And that is we must always push the door, which is a little bit open. Because having seen Hair, I went back with my Spotmatic Pentax. And I pushed the stage door and they said, come in. They said, would you mind taking photographs of us? We need them for the playbill. And all of a sudden, going from the outsider to the inside and realizing that if you do actually move through doors that you can see, it's amazing what can happen. And for me, that really was Williston. I mean, the restrictions of Harrow, you couldn't do anything. You remember it, Apollo 13, Woodstock, it was a phenomenal time of passion and purpose in America. And during the spring break, I sort of got friends from Williston were going down to Huntsville. And I remember sort of hitchhiking from Huntsville, heading to New Orleans, and a car stopped. And I said, so are you heading to New Orleans? He said, no, I'm heading to Colorado Springs. So I hitchhiked to Colorado Springs. I then hitchhiked back to Washington, D.C. and down to Florida. And that was all in about 10 days. And then I was going to hitchhike down to the Keys. And a car stopped. Anyway, I got a ride. But I saw a private airport. I said, oh, drop me off here. And I got a ride to the Bahamas. And I think for me, what I really got from Williston was anything is possible. You just have to realize that people are going to be nice to you. And this is me hitchhiking out in Yellowstone Park, hitching between Gardner and Livingston in Montana. And I've got a sign there saying, not hungry. And that was because a couple of hitchhikers had been picked up and they'd eaten the driver. And knuckles were found in their pockets a few days later. But literally, I was hitching the same road 1 month later. People still picked me up. They were still nice to me. And I realized, and it's just gone with me forever from my experiences in America, that sort of willingness to trust. Because hitchhiking, you have to have trust. I trust me, trust you. And I just love it. So there I am teaching my sons to hitchhike. But trying to break my children out of the traditions and give them this sense of trust. So there's one of my boys, Christian, in Africa. And there he is leaping off a waterfall, trying to give him a sense of adventure. When I asked my father how to educate my children, he simply said, make sure they play sports at which they can get seriously hurt. And I think, this is what we've got to do to really start to realize what is an education. And there is my son talking to Chief. He's actually the chief of the warriors, Chief Cool. And we were talking to him about how will you know you've been successful as a chief warrior? He said, well, in 5 years' time, I'll know if the person I've selected does a better job than me. And this whole sort of set of values of what's important. So for my children, when they were 16, I sent them to go and live with the Maasai for a week, because I wanted them to have that sense of going off on adventures and realizing that all through life there are mountains to climb, and that sense of fun and adventure of getting to the top of it. And nothing was more for me on the adventure. When I was 22, having been at Williston, I got back, I started working in London. And I had the opportunity, well, I didn't have the opportunity, I created the opportunity to go to Japan. And that glorious sensation of the one-way ticket to Japan on the Trans-Siberian Express across Russia. And all I had with me is a couple of suitcases. My first job was looking after, I became manager of the world skipping rope champion. And that was my job. But what it did, it let me go off to Beijing in 1975, get captured by a whole lot of screaming mobs who had taken photographs they didn't like. But just seeing Mao was still alive, and it was an extraordinary time to be in China. And then I went, and then in 1985, China opened a tiny bit and I could go hitchhiking. So again, I just love this idea of the freedom of the roads and what's important. This is hitchhiking out along the Silk Road. Fortunately, I had a few too many beers and I fell out of a window and paralyzed myself, but that's another story. And then again, this adventure going across Australia. And I started to work and build a sales promotion business. But probably where I learned my main lessons were heading off into northern Kenya. And on this camel safari, each evening the Maasai would come in. And what I saw there was they had absolute presence of who they were. They had confidence. They had substance without arrogance. And I realized my entire education in England had been, how can you be massively arrogant with minimum substance? So I started to become fascinated. What is it they've got that we've lost? Why don't they need the normal education? So I went to meet the Papua New Guinea ambassador in Tokyo, an amazing man called Joseph Nombre. And I said, what is it you've got that we've lost? And he said, well, I don't know. Why don't you go to my village? So I went to his village in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, where they were still running around with feathers. And there I am in the highlands. And I started to say, so why do you have so many feathers? They said, well, a big man has many feathers. A bigger man can hand out his feathers. So the whole idea of leadership is, how do you get people to contribute? And then I said to him, so what about your spear? Why do you have a spear? They said, well, you have to earn it. You can't buy it. You can't sell it. You can't give it away. And again, I thought of all of those people in Tokyo who thought they were entitled to respect, that they had not earned it. So I started to see the link between what you earn and how you behave. And I could see the link as to what was missing so many sort of Western organizations. And when I asked the ambassador, what is the single most important thing in his life? He said it was his territory, and he was able to draw a map showing how he saw his world. And on that, he then put his duty and his aims and ambitions. And I became fascinated from then on as to what does territory actually mean? And I realized my territory at that time was a couple of bars in Tokyo where people were friendly to me, my BMW, and a small desk. And I started to think, what is it that we really, really need? And what territory can I go and explore? And what I realized from sort of hitchhiking and everything else is that the territory is where we're trusted. So I started to think that we're really born with three airbags. We're born with trust in ourselves, we're born with trust in others, and trust in Mother Nature, and this glorious sense that we can be trusted and we can see over the wall and what's going on. But as these airbags deflate, what people seem to do is to jump off and grab the cardboard boxes of a new job, a new car, or something else, and try to think that by owning something, you're trusting yourself more, but all they are like cardboard boxes. They just deflate the airbags. And what I realized is that I had to trust myself. I had to go off on these journeys. And this is when each year I would plan a different journey to go. This is taking my camel train through the Taklamakan Desert of Western China. And this is a wonderful, but really seeing that from these journeys where my shadows fell and thinking about what I could learn. This was going across Papua New Guinea. We had 24 bottles of wine and no food, because what I had seen was that there were villages. So I thought food won't be a problem, but village wine will be. But on this trip, there was my wife, Victoria, there was a fellow called Paul, who was my best man, and there was Philip. And Philip was a complainer. And what I saw is that his complaining completely destroyed the morale of the group. And what I saw is complainers ultimately are those who don't trust themselves or anybody else. He had so little trust in human nature, he had a padlock on his backpack. And I started to realize that complaining destroys the morale. And when I got back to Tokyo, someone invited me to climb this mountain in Western China in Xinjiang. It's 24,500 feet. So it's just about the 24575. Anyway, it's just about the same height as the North Col of Everest. And we were going to do it without porters and oxygen. So I decided I needed new skills. I needed new ways of looking at things. And I decided to go and climb Africa's 5,000 meter peaks. But I said, people said, can I come? There's my wife and a sister at the top of Kilimanjaro, looking at Mount Kenya and realizing that climbing Mount Kenya, it has its moments just like life. But what I realized is you actually achieve the goals that you want, not by your abilities, but really by sharing your dreams, sharing your hopes. And anybody who came with me on this trip, I got them to sign a document saying, I will not complain if I get eaten or trodden on by animals, if extra porters are employed to carry wine, because I needed to get people with an attitude. And I even had at the bottom, if I complain, I realize I can be sent home. But if I get 2 of my toes turn black, I'm allowed to say it's a bit chilly. And actually, this fellow here, he went on to climb Everest. He's got his I will not complain t-shirt on, and he actually lost a couple of toes, but he's not complaining. And I just think we need this sort of sense of adventure. And having climbed these mountains, I thought, what is it that I've really learned? And I started to think, what is it that success means? And at this time back in 1989 in Japan, the stock market was highest in the world. Japan can say number one, Japan can say no. And there was a certain massive arrogance about the Japanese. And I started to realize that actually their success came at a massive price. And I went to a thing called the Hell Training School, where they got you to scream in front of railway stations, and they really intimidated you. But what I loathed most of it, that's me with Diane Sawyer being interviewed for 60 minutes. But what they got people to do was to put on the badges of shame. And I just thought, how disgusting to humiliate people from the start. And then I thought, isn't that really what happens to people at school? You're too stupid, you can't do it. You start as a failure, we're going to pour information into you and you're going to be useful. And I just thought how evil it is to intimidate people. And this is what happened. The next thing is what happened to someone who failed.
This is a man who at the end of those 3 days had failed the course completely. His future as a manager is probably finished.
And I just thought, what we need to do in people is to unlock trust and willpower. I thought the most important thing, give people trust. I'd been given trust all my life how could I hand that to other people? So that meant leaving central Tokyo. We got a farmhouse 120 kilometers outside Tokyo in Chiba. My children were born in the local hospital, the first white children to be born there. And we started with a tarpaulin. We borrowed an Indian teepee. We called our company I Will Not Complain. And the goal of it was to give people trust, to let them feel in their lives that they have this sense of value through courage. And it was really, really exciting to give people this sense of hope and self-belief. We then moved on to having a training center at the foot of the Great Wall. And I loved using the wall as that metaphor that actually the Chinese had to build 24,000 kilometers of walls, because the mentality of the nomad is free. And freedom, the more you have, the less you are. The nomads have got this ability to adapt. We got lovely articles in different newspapers. But what I saw is that you could really build a team quite easily of people. So what I realized that trust and willpower isn't enough. And I started to realize team building isn't enough. And I started to think that maybe success in the future is knowing that you trust yourself. You've earned your spear. That as a leader, you have the purpose and the ability to hand out your feathers. And that's been my dedication over the last 10, 20 years. And it's all around knowing you have a map. Because what I've discovered is every indigenous person has a map. So every conversation has context and relevance. And inside every person, there is the ability to draw a map as well, where people see themselves, where they see their goals. And once people have drawn a map, they can start to work out where they are, where they're going, and how they're going to get there. And once you've seen someone else's map and you start to know where you're going, you can start to trust yourself and other people more. The trouble is, though, in many organizations, you don't have that clarity. So this is a map drawn in Papua New Guinea. So very clearly they can draw their village, their fishing area, their hunting area. So every conversation has context and relevance. As I say, drawn by Casper Ban, the Committee of the Councillors in New Guinea. This is a map drawn by Thomson Reuters. It's exactly the same thing. Everybody in any organization can still draw the village, the hunting area, the fishing area. And once people have that in a map, then people can start to work out what are the different roads that they actually need. But what's happening in organizations is you have the chairman saying we're heading for paradise, but all the employees see is bullshit bridge fantasy applications and everybody on a different island. And this is really the fundamentals of most organizations. People feel their territory is under threat, their leaders are isolated, an internal lack of communication will prevent them from dealing with the first two. So what I've been working out is how do we get everybody onto the same map, especially now? How can we build trust by helping people talk to each other? So this is when we did some team building with Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, training them on the Great Wall. And they drew their maps, and what they saw is that they were sort of lost trying to get into the mountains and the hills, and they didn't quite know where they were going. And then the head of it drew this map saying, why don't we work with China, Seattle and China, to raise Africa? Why don't we do something that is so groundbreaking? So they came up with the idea, polio, mobilize resources from China for global polio eradication. And that is the plan that they came up with. And what I saw the other day is that wild polio has been eradicated in Africa. So I can't claim credit for it, but I do know where that conversation started. So what I believe everybody needs is a map to know where they are, where they want to get to. How do we move? How can we actually communicate? And I thought as COVID started a year ago, would I ever be able to do the journeys again, taking people off to Mongolia and Africa? But what I've discovered is everybody can still draw their maps. But with COVID, what they see is they see fear. How do we migrate fear to hope? How do we give people belief? So what I've been doing is talking about taking people on these journeys as they suffer from COVID and the challenges companies face, etc. Is really where are we migrating to in these different difficult times? Because everybody see those same green pastures individually. And as I say, what is fascinating is everybody can still draw their village. This is where I am. This is where I want to be. This is where I need to be, whether people are on trains going at 300 miles an hour in China. People can still talk about the challenges they face. And once they can talk about it, then they can start to get context and relevance of where they are, where they're going individually or collectively as a team. And I think this really shows what's happened through this mapping of, this is drawn in March last year by an educator. And what they saw is the Department of Education, the funding agency, everybody's fighting each other. The last person that's being thought about is the student. And this chap had been involved, as I say, in education for 30 years. He said, why don't we get students across that bridge and give them hope, give them belief, give them understanding? And we all collectively laughed and said, well, that ain't going to happen in our lifetime, is it? And then this is the map drawn on April the 26th last year, and saying, wow, because of COVID, Ofsted, all of the shackles of education and structure have gone. And gradually people can start to move, students, teachers, the fires of hope. And now, 2 months ago, this is where the education is. It is completely changed. What children need to know, but this could be any business, any organization. The maps have changed. And finally, after 30 years of first writing out, I believe that people need trust and willpower as the currency. People are finally going, yes, we need a map. Yes, we need trust. Yes, we need to work out how we get there. So thank you for watching the journey that I've been on from my different experiences and how I see things. So I hope you've enjoyed it. But thank you.
Thank you. That was fantastic. And I'm ready to travel. I want to, we're talking about being content, staying where we are and taking advantage of that opportunity, but you have really tempted me back into the desire to get out and see more of the world.
Yeah, I'm just planning a trip at the moment. I've just sort of started putting lines on a map for about 3 months into the mountains of Western Mongolia next year. I mean, Mongolia is just fabulous. That openness of the girl, you just go in there, help yourself, and everybody's nice to you.
So what I think is I do want to move on to some questions. We have some that were pre-submitted, and I think we'll start with those. And then if anyone listening has more questions, if you want to go ahead and just type into the chat, I have a question, and we'll sort of call on you in order, and you'll be able to unmute and have a conversation with Anthony. But in fact, actually, we could even start with someone who thoughtfully pre-submitted a question but is here. John Buxton is here, I think. John, do you want to unmute and ask your question of Anthony?
There we go. Well, I submitted it some time ago, so I can't remember what I asked.
I'll remind you. You had asked for Anthony's view on efforts he's observed from China to extend their influence internationally over time.
Yes, thank you. By the way, I'm from the class of 63.
Ah, right, even older than me, so yes.
Much older than all of you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all see empires and influence and what is right and wrong. I mean, China has raised more people out of poverty than anybody else has ever done. They believe in the collective more than the individual. But yes, it is absolutely terrifying what they're doing in Africa at the moment, where you talk to people, the influences, how they're even opening up the small shops and putting people out of business. It is extremely frightening. But I mean, I was in China at the golden time. I mean, I was held prisoner by screaming mobs in 1976, 75. In 1992, I was allowed to open my training center at the foot of the Great Wall and go hitchhiking from Tibet across the Silk Road. Those freedoms would no longer exist for me as a foreigner.
I think people don't realize, I was in that part of the world living from 71 to 74.
Yeah.
And I was stationed in Manama, Bahrain.
Yeah.
And even then, we saw significant involvement with China and Tanzania and Ethiopia, and even into the Congo and some of those places.
Yeah.
So this has been going on for a long time.
Oh God, yes. I mean, when I first went there in 75, and then again in 78, I mean, literally, there were masses. They had a terrible time, the Black Africans who were there, but they were all the sons of the presidents of each African country. I mean, the Chinese were already very, very well aware as to who they should influence at an early time. I mean, it was, it's fascinating what they're doing.
It would be an understatement to say they take the long view.
Yeah, I mean, I think you all know the quote by when someone asked Zhou Enlai, has the French Revolution been a success? And he said, it's far too early to tell. But wow, now I believe, what were you doing there in Bahrain?
I initially went over there in 1971 as aide and flag lieutenant to Vice Admiral Duke Bain.
Right.
We were relieving the British at HMS Jewfair as they pulled out east of Suez. And so that was my start. And then we flew all over the Indian Ocean littoral, much of Africa, and which is part of our area.
Wow.
And then I resigned my commission and stayed over there for another year.
Right. And then you came back to the States then, did you?
Yeah, I came back to the States and I said, okay, now I'm an art dealer. And I had, after Williston, I went to Tulane. I had 3 weeks of art history and dropped it because I thought it was boring.
Yeah.
And now I've been in the art business for 47 years and 25 years on Antiques Roadshow. So I think that's finding your bridge.
Yeah. And I think that's what I've been trying to do. My life is to find the bridge and to find what one's passionate about and how do you make it relevant. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we've got another great question here, and I think it's partially answered, but we have a question asking, why did you choose this path? And I think already answered, what did you gain? But perhaps not answered, what did you lose, if anything?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot that I don't think I lost anything. I mean, there weren't many alternatives of what to do. I mean, when you're told you're the most stupid boy in the school, what do? You're not exactly thinking that, everything is going to be an opportunity. And it's not as if corporations have said, hey, come and join us. I've always been the outsider, and I've loved it. But I think it's essential to realize that you got to carve your own way with the opportunities that you've been given. And I don't regret any of them. And it's still exceptionally interesting. And as I say, I'm 70 now, but it's never been sort of more exciting as where things are now. So I think one has to look at what opportunities one has taken. I'm sure you would, mostly agree. It's a difficult question as to what might have been or what should have been.
So here's another sort of taking you back to early days, not the earliest days of being told you were stupid, but the days of arriving in Williston and finding a new environment and new horizons. Someone asks, do you use any of the life lessons you learned at Williston today?
I would think I used them the whole time. I mean, for me, it was extraordinary because freedom was terrifying for me when I arrived at Williston. Some of you may remember the head boy immediately went on strike after about the third day of school, saying, right, we're going to have long hair, we're going to do this. I mean, he would have been expelled from school in England. And this whole idea was you are free. There was a master called Bob Bruninghouse, I remember, and I remember being caught in the bushes kissing some girl. And I mean, I would have been thrown out of school in England on that. And it was just this whole idea that you're pretty much up to yourself. And I think that is the hope and the belief that Williston has given me, that one can actually chart one's own life and get on with it. And I would say on a daily basis, I feel that changed my life. It just showed me the open road and the freedom and the opportunity to trust myself, which is just, it would never have happened in the UK.
So going on to the open road.
Yeah.
What is the one piece, and this is from a younger alum who asks, what is the one piece of advice you have for someone who wants to travel more, but isn't sure where to start? What's the most important lesson your travels have taught you? So how do you get out there and start having adventures?
I think one's got to realize that travel is simply a state of mind. And I think everything goes on in your brain. So I think you've actually got to realize that traveling is what you're doing every day. It's just finding yourself in a different environment. And how do you enjoy it and how do you learn from it, opposed to thinking the destination and the photograph is really the lesson. So I think it's realizing that each day there is a different journey that you can enjoy. And then gradually you go further and further on your journeys and you meet different people and you can start to trust. Because I think travel is trust. I mean, it is taking you in theory out of your comfort zone, but it's actually having those relationships that make your mind go, wow, it's good to be alive. And I think that's what travel has got to do. And I think from an early age, you've got to see how that helps your peace of mind and your contentment. Because I'm sure some of the people of my age and our age, it's contentment is what matters. And it's matter having the journey that making one happy.
So practically speaking, we'll continue with the travel questions here. Practically speaking, Elizabeth, I think that is probably you, and you pre-submitted a question. You want to, I don't know if you feel like turning on your video and unmuting and joining the conversation.
I do, but I don't remember the question I asked.
This is the problem with registering early, which I'm grateful that everyone does. You wanted to know, what item do you think is most necessary to bring that you might not think to bring if you're going to do rural or rough travel?
I think you have to work out how close you need to be to porcelain.
What? You mean a toilet?
Yeah, I do mean a toilet. No, I mean, this might sound funny, but I mean, I was with a chap and his wife. We went to Africa, and I sort of said, yeah, it'll be pretty rough. But all of a sudden, we realized we had to be within 20 minutes of porcelain at any moment. And shall we say, in rural Africa, that is pretty rough. I think it's just an open state of mind. I think there's nothing else that you take with you. And I mean, I've slept in many a hut in different places. I think it's a state of mind that you have to take, that this is an adventure, this is a story.
So there wasn't any particular something that you carried with you on every trip that you thought was essential, like a Swiss Army knife or
a bottle of whiskey, I think, is probably the thing that I normally take with me, because I think a bottle of whiskey is never a bad thing. The other thing that is really, really good is simply a Polaroid camera.
to get pictures back to the people that you see?
If you take a photograph and give it to them, then they're not always asking for money. You can always make friends, and I've used it before with Polaroids, and now Fuji's got a camera, and I'm not sure which other ones, but I think that is the most amazing way of traveling and getting to know people with it.
That's
Jill,
it.
can I ask a question?
What? Yeah.
Can I ask a question, Jill?
Yeah.
Yes, Neville.
Tony, I don't know whether you remember coming to Hartford.
I do, absolutely. Yeah, you were there at the same time as I was. Absolutely, yes.
Had you to the house, and we.
Yeah.
Listen, I have a completely different career, and what you're saying is amazing me, because you talk about trust, and it's wonderful, but what about the trust of the people of you? I mean, and what I did in my career had to do in some cases with the police and intelligence services of the world. And I just cannot imagine running around as a 70-year-old or 60-year-old or 50-year-old British national, running around with a camera, snapping pictures in all of these countries. I mean, we've had people that have done that and never been heard from again.
Nah, people are always going to be nice to me. I've never had a bad experience. Never, ever, ever. In all sorts of different places. I mean, honestly, reasonably careful with where I take stuff, but on the whole, Peter, I mean, I've made abysmal decisions of people that I've trusted commercially. But you know, that's a sort of different set of skills. But I find people have always been really, really nice to me and always invited me in, and never had a problem. But I mean, even in Zaire, I mean, some of you might have, I mean, are you familiar with Zaire?
No, I've never been there, but
I've
countries.
I've hitchhiked 300 kilometers in Zaire along the spine of Africa. And, you know, really no problems.
Boy, what a story.
No, I'm still doing it. I mean, you know, I still wander into anywhere and people are going to be nice to me. It's just a foregone conclusion. And
be safe out there.
Is it
Yeah.
maybe, do you suppose, because you do walk into those situations with an attitude of trust rather than apprehension?
I think you've absolutely got to go in with trust.
Yeah.
You've got to go in there with your shoulders broad and with your hand out. Hello. And, you know, you look for the biggest, ugliest bloke you can possibly find. You call them sir, shake them by the hand and say, could you help me, please? And I've done that a few times and it's worked wonders.
So we've got another question from Richard. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah.
Hi, Anthony, again. Thank you for your wonderful presentation, and the photographs are really excellent.
Thank you.
The slight contradiction I'd like you to try and reconcile for me. Obviously, you're slightly random where you went,
Yeah.
especially in the early part of your life. Didn't seem to be much of a strategy or a plan. And then then at some stage you learn about territory mapping, which actually seems quite structured, and particularly, and it's perhaps surprising from you know, indigenous people that don't have the education that we perhaps have, that they develop such skills. And it's sort of an interesting contradiction, really. And I wondered how you put that together and make it work for you.
Well, basically, what I did was, I mean, I was living in Japan. We built a sales promotion company, and then we built a brand of leather goods, which are what we're using for the sales promotion. So, I mean, that was for about 30 years I did that. I mean, so that was from 1973 until about 1988. And it was really each winter and summer, there was always a month or two free. So I'd go off on a different journey. And those trips really were just finding a point on a map. I mean, I remember someone once saying, gosh, Djibouti, that's the arsehole of the world. Let's go to Djibouti. And having those sort of experiences. And that's when I then set up the first outdoor team building and leadership development company in Japan. I mean, that was pretty focused and clear. But I was fascinated by trying to build teams and seeing what worked as far as building teams. And then I started to realize that building a team alone wasn't enough. People wanted the clarity. So I've always been on a progression of trying to find out what is motivation, what is inspiration, and how do you inspire people. And so the mapping has gradually evolved when I realized that if you want to have purpose, you want to have identity, and you want to have clarity, you have to have a map. And it's been 20 years of bringing out these maps from people, and it shows them things about themselves that they'd never really thought of. So I agree, it seems fairly haphazard, but it has actually been a structure of what I believe people actually need. And never has it been more important now to know that everybody's on the same map, so you can talk about the problems you're trying to solve.
And have you found that the courses that you run, which involve territory mapping, have you found that the skills that the people that the companies send have actually then been taken back and been used positively within the companies and the way they're going, or do they tend to fade away?
I wouldn't, well, that's obviously part of the cynicism of the whole thing, because I've run many magnificent workshops and nothing's ever changed. I would say what I do is I work with the chief. So we're not really teaching skills. So we're working with the chief to get some clarity about what they actually need to do as an organization. So that's where you need to get the endorsement of the chief in charge of it to take the ownership of what are the ideas that come from it. So it's, in a way, it's a SWOT that's got the emotional perceptions. Right. Because once you can get to the emotional perceptions of what's driving behavior, then you can start to work out how you can make some changes that will solve those.
And do you think have you tried working with British companies in this country on it, or is it just something that you find particularly suited to Asia?
No, it works absolutely with anybody, anywhere in the world. It's quite extraordinary. It has absolutely amazed me. It doesn't matter what the nationalities are. I ran one session in Singapore. We had 25 people, 16 different nationalities. I ran a mapping session a year ago, a little over a year ago in May, when we had 180 people on 5 continents talking about their territory and their maps and what they're trying to do. So it seems to work, whether it's individual or whether it's trying to solve strategic problems for different organizations. And especially now when everybody's locked away, it actually seems people sitting at home are actually able to think about their perceptions of their territory more than they would sitting in an office.
Good,
and
thank you.
Not to assume that everyone knows, but Anthony, would you just explain quickly what a SWOT is? Because
that's strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and whatever.
Right.
And you sort of have a quadrangle, and everybody puts it in. But the thing is, they're just using words, so there's no context to what it is. I mean, going back briefly, Richard, I mean, basically every indigenous person knows their territory because they were born with it. So therefore they know what they're meant to be doing, and therefore they understand what leadership means and how they make decisions. And that's why literally we have the Maasai teaching leadership programs. So we have the Mongolians or people from Nepal talking about how would you make a decision in a certain situation, because that's what they've been taught to do, to make the right decision. Because the leader, I mean, I remember once in Kenya saying, who's the leader? They simply said, what's the problem? We've got many leaders. Tell us the problem. We will find the most appropriate person.
Yeah.
So
So
Well, I hope it goes on being successful.
I hope so. I'd love to continue the conversation anyway and have a couple of beers if you're around. Where are you at the moment? In London?
I live near Birmingham,
Oh, right. Okay. Well,
UK, not Alabama.
No. I've pitched around there, as I was saying, but no. So I'm in Suffolk, so maybe we can catch up. It would be great.
We do have one thing in common, and that we've both been to, I think, every state in the Union.
Oh, I have too. Yeah.
That's why I think you have too.
Yeah. I finally got to Oklahoma. I drove to Oklahoma. I didn't hitch to Oklahoma, but I went to Arkansas, and then I remember in the good old days of Merle Haggard singing "I'm an Okie from Muskogee." So I drove to Muskogee, and I sort of said, where can I meet some Okies? And they pointed me down the bar. So I wandered in and said, hello, I'm English. I'm trying to find some Okies from Muskogee. Could you point me to one, please? And had this amazing conversation in a bar with a whole lot of Okies talking about Merle and the song. So,
switching gears a bit, I'm looking at some of the attendees, and we've got we have some photographers here. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your photography, about how that became such a big part of what you do, and what you use your photography.
I don't know. I mean, I've still got my old Nikons here. I mean, they're just beautiful sort of old bits of kit. I don't use them anymore. I've got Olympuses, but it's just like an old friend, and I just love it going out there on a trip, sort of as if one's sort of hunting for photographs and for memories. So that's all part of. I'm sure the photographers here just know that relationship with your camera.
Where did you learn photography?
I never learned it. I just.
When did you first pick it up as an interest?
Oh, when I was 7 years old, I got my first camera there. So I just sort of keep them on my desk as sort of memories. That's why I sort of think nomadically, we don't need that much. We just need the cameras and a few other things that we have. And that's sort of enough.
So that sounds like a partial answer to the question of the one thing you always like to have with you when you travel, which is
my camera. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm lost without my camera and my photographs. So yes.
So we have a little more time here. Are there more questions? Where we have a couple.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Henry, go ahead.
Henry, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can do. Yeah, loud and clear. Henry.
Yeah. My name is Henry Mitchell. I've lived in Alaska pretty much for the last 40-some years.
Yeah.
And I worked mostly with Yupik Eskimos and Athabascan Indians on a number of their issues, mostly fishery related, but also game issues. I was interested from your perspective of the various subsistence hunting, fishing, and farming and herding cultures that you've dealt with. What changes have you seen amongst the young people? Are they migrating away from this? Yeah.
I mean, it's totally being killed off. It really has. And I mean, what we did in Australia or in Canada or elsewhere, I mean, it's just horrendous. I mean, did you see the same thing, Henry? I mean,
absolutely. I first was living in an Athabascan village on the Yukon River in '77, and there still were probably in the local villages there probably over 100 males that were basically earning what money that they had trapping, with the addition of a little bit of commercial fishing in the summertime out of small skiffs for chum salmon, which there was a high demand in the Japanese market at that time. And basically people ate moose and caribou, and they trapped beaver in the wintertime and marten. There's very few people that do that today in those same villages. And the young people are pretty much migrating away from the villages, and it's really sort of sad to see, but you can understand it. And I was interested in, are you seeing that same effect in Mongolia amongst herders and among the Maasai as people get educated that they really don't want to live that lifestyle anymore?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, completely and utterly, and it totally destroys their identity and everything else. Papua New Guinea, I also saw where the mines came in and completely depopulated the villages. So you just had a few children and some old women there, and everybody else had completely gone. No, I mean, it's absolutely disgusting. But I mean, but that's what civilization wants to do. They want to completely and utterly, just remove people's identity so that everybody's sort of having power, wealth, and status split, and that people have lost their identity, and then they can be taxed and controlled. I mean, I think it's just disgusting. Right. But are you still up in Alaska?
Well, currently I'm in Massachusetts this winter, but usually I spend pretty much the most of the year in Alaska, though I am retired now. So I'm not out traveling around to the villages, on the Bering Sea coast and up and down the Yukon like I did years ago. But, I stay pretty much in touch with the various issues that are going on there, like the Pebble Mine, and which is a big development you might know about in the Bristol Bay region. But it's been interesting watching that transition. There always will be, in my opinion, some Native people in Alaska who will maintain a very secure subsistence lifestyle with a few attributes of, now in many villages they have satellite, TV, and they have internet connection. But there are people who will maintain their village lifestyles. But the bulk of Alaska villages, I believe, will pretty much disappear in the next 30 years.
I think so, and I think we are the last people to see it, the same as with the Maasai, but you can't blame them. I mean, not having a bath and living in a mud hut. I mean, I tell you, one is absolutely exhausted after about 4 or 5 days. Mongolia is slightly different, but I mean, I've been in Mongolia joining the migrations in -30. And you sort of go, there's got to be an easier way. But I mean, yes, they all have their mobile phones and they have the 30 television channels. But I would love to keep in contact if you wouldn't mind and find out more.
Well, my email is Mitchell, 2 L's, akfish@gmail.com.
Okay, well, okay.
We can share contact information.
Thank you very much. No, I'd absolutely love that. I really would. You've never come across a chap called Bob Crockett, have you, with his dogs? He did a lot of television and work. I went with his dogs down the Squintner River for 4 or 5 days.
I don't know him personally, but of course, when I first moved to the Yukon River, village dogs, not the race teams that you see today. People were still trapping with dog teams in those days. Almost every village had at least 10 to 20 teams, and that's all changed too also.
God, no, Alaska's out of this world. I was only there for a few days, but I loved it. No, I mean, the whole thing is, it's just, and that's why I think, people, the number of people who know their territory is just going to reduce and reduce, and the number of people who know their culture will equally be reduced.
Right.
But I think organizations need to know it as well.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. It was very interesting watching your presentation. And thank you, Jill. This is quite exciting.
Oh, glad to have you. And I think I have 2 questions. So we'll go Richard first, and then Elizabeth, you have another question. So we'll go you second.
Okay, Anthony, it's just a question really, whether you know an old explorer friend of mine, John Blasher Snell.
Oh, Jesus, God, I know him very well. Yeah.
He's been to Mongolia many times.
He certainly has, with pianos up the Amazon. And I organized a thing called the Cock-Up Club the other day, and he sort of turned up and talked at it. He is a phenomenal bloke.
He's still exploring mid-80s.
Yeah. He's
Quite extraordinary.
He's quite phenomenal. Yes. Where did you come across him?
I went on one of his expeditions to Costa Rica.
Oh, what, Operation Drake or Rally?
No, it didn't have a particular name. It was a one-off.
Yeah.
It was in the Corcovado National Park, right down in the southwest.
Yeah, long before health and safety got involved.
Well, we didn't lose anybody. Let's put it that way. It's pretty hairy though, a lot of it.
Yeah. Oh,
a lot of snakes. A huge number of snakes we come across. So it's one of the last huge rainforests in the on the western coast of the Americas, and just huge amount of beautiful animals still there, and a lot of dangerous animals too, particularly snakes. But we survived.
Yeah, he changed everybody's lives. God, he's a fantastic human being. Yeah.
So that's interesting. Yeah, but he goes to Mongolia and he rides out there at camels and horses, all sorts of things.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, well, I've been talking to him about that last time. Yeah. So yes.
Elizabeth.
Yeah. This conversation has stimulated some thoughts for me. From several different countries now, several of you have mentioned something about cultural change. And one of you said something about that you thought that education was creating it. I was living in central Mexico and I watched money come in and people become desirous of things and a betterment of their lifestyle. So I've always thought it was a socioeconomic situation that was driving the cultural change. And I watched it radically change a couple of communities in central Mexico and in Guatemala, in other countries that I've been in. So I'm just wondering if you think that it is education or possibly socioeconomics that are creating these changes where you think the tribes are.
I think it's socioeconomics. I really do. And I think it's also embracing Western education, which is often absolutely valueless. I mean, because, you know, if they've been brought up with a core set of values and then they get thrown that you've got to take all your exams, etc., and pass your exams, I think it's a combination of both of them. But I just think dangling money and putting a mine or something like that, and people can go and earn money, it completely screws everything up very, very, very quickly.
That's what I thought I saw as well.
Yeah. Henry, I think you'd agree with that, wouldn't you?
Henry, we've got you on mute at the moment. There you go.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. But, you know, it's interesting to see what education does and modern tools do with the culture. We were doing a fishery project up in Kotzebue on Chukchi Sound, in our lower unit on the boat that we were going off on a 10-day crab trip, exploring farther north. It just went, and they said that it would take 10 days to 15 days to ship this lower unit to us. And one of the guys on the crew said, my brother can probably make that part, this elaborate looking gear. Went over to his little shack in Kotzebue. He was inside smoking a joint. He was an ivory carver. And with the Dremel, we showed him the gear that was all stripped. And with the Dremel, in 3 hours, he made a gear that absolutely worked.
Yeah.
And that was using his talent, using modern tools, which he used to carve ivory, which he sold on the market. Yeah. But it was absolutely amazing to watch that.
Yeah.
So
that's also how we judge education, and that is the whole problem. An educated person, you know, will never go hungry, and I think that is, yeah, right. It's all around the judgment and the values of what is knowledge,
right?
What is wisdom, and yeah, no, I'd love to chat more, Henry, on that one. I really would.
Yeah,
but
so we've got another question here. which is, as it ties in with this, is you're talking about places that have, whether through socioeconomic or different changes, become more modernized, I guess. I don't want to, so what is the, I guess, wildest place left that you travel to? The least changed, the most unchanged place.
I think Mongolia is really, really, really fantastic, because they've got the money, they've got the cattle, they've got the freedom, and they've got the hospitality, but there are just so few people there. So for me, that place is where I think they can still live, because they've got they can go to the cities, they can go to the towns, they can get the education. It's a place where actually women earn more than men. They're more educated, because when the communists sort of collapsed in the 90s, the men went out and looked after the cattle, and the women, the women went off to get educated, and the men went off to look after the cattle and things. And to me, it's just got a fantastic balance still of the countryside. I mean, I really don't know where else. I mean, Kenya, I absolutely love, and up in northern Kenya, but it's much harsher. Mongolia has just got this lovely sense of a sort of balance, and they've never been colonized. I mean, they really haven't. I mean, there is not one single word of Chinese, even though the Chinese administered it or conquered it for about 300 years. Not a word of Russian, not a word of Mongolian. They are Mongolian, and it is just a fantastic place.
So we have time for probably one or two more questions, but there's an interesting comment here that Elizabeth put in the chat, which is just noting, and there are people here who haven't spoken yet who are equally interesting, I will add, but kind of wondering, looking back to your commonality of being at Williston or at the Northampton School, was there a time in high school when you were that young, when you had a realization that, looking back now, you can see sort of parlayed you onto this path? And I think, in the interest of making this a very interesting conversation, I'm going to unmute everyone, because we're a little bit of a smaller group here, and feel free to sort of just join in and let us know. And thank you, Elizabeth, for asking this question. And I'm trying to talk and unmute everyone, so hold on. I'm going to allow you all you can all just unmute yourselves. Go ahead and click off if you'd like, and to open the conversation up a little bit to, even when you were in high school, do you look back and recognize that there was some experience you had that set you on this path that you find yourself on today?
Having been at a couple of reunions now, one of the commonalities I noticed is that the people at the reunion that I'd gone to Williston with seemed to be more independent thinking, more independent spirited. So I'm just wondering, since now 3 of the people that have sort of chimed in that have been in Alaska, Mongolia, like all over the world, that's kind of unusual in this size group to find people that have had such adventurous careers. I'm just curious if you think Williston, or something about the vibe at Williston, maybe somehow gave you something that you wouldn't have gotten somewhere else that sent you off in these directions.
And I'm adding Northampton School for Girls into this as well, because at the time when you were there, you were being sort of independent young women in a boarding school environment, which wasn't that usual either. And I've found in my experience traveling that has set a lot of women off on some very interesting paths. So open conversation, please.
Yeah, if I can make a comment. 1972, 71, 72, when I was there in 72, was the first year of co-education at Williston, Northampton. A very, very unusual and unique year. Of course, I was immersed as a foreigner into this. That made it very interesting. But I suppose the challenge that everybody was facing, not just amongst the students, but as I later found out, very much amongst the staff as well, to find where they're actually going to go with this, was a bit like me on my voyage of discovery into North America. And actually, I spent a lot of time thinking about where I would travel. And although I did travel to a lot of places, actually I spent particularly a lot of time in Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, because I'd done a course at Williston, which was entitled then History of the American Indian. It wouldn't quite be called that now, but that's what it was called then. And that was absolutely the most fascinating course, amongst many other fascinating courses I did at Williston, because it opened up a whole new history for me, which I wouldn't have got in the UK for sure. No one was teaching that subject in the UK that I'm aware of, certainly not at my school. And so one of the things I wanted to do was to go down to the Yucatan to learn about the Mayan Indians as on the ground, as it were, in reality. So that was part of my adventure. But there were many other things that set me traveling, including Anthony, I have to say, when I met him in a pub in London. He told me what he'd done in the US, and that set me alight as well. So yeah, it certainly opened up my mind in a huge number of ways, for then and for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I think that's the opening of the mind. It's correct. It's possible. It's extraordinary. You know, enthusiasm is not a certifiable mental disorder. No, it was, to me, it was just extraordinary. And I didn't realize it at the time, to be honest. Yeah.
One of the advantages, and it's interesting to have the two Brits with us. One of the big advantages I think was Williston is, and I spent 4 years there, is we had this opportunity to live and work and study with these exchange students. We had some great British students there, and I remember one of my best friends was Jerry Padmore, who is the son of the ambassador from Liberia. And to have that experience, it's not something you're going to get in high school or in a different kind of environment. So I think it's things like that that definitely broaden your thinking, and maybe to some extent that was contributory in my life to the traveling that I've done, which has been all over the world.
I think one of the reasons that the English Speaking Union Exchange program, which is still going ahead even now, so many years later, and is very successful, by the way, is that it's why schools subscribe to it, is it does bring in people from different cultures, and it's opened up more, so it's not as closed as it was to private schools. For example, you know, the state schools or state school children from the UK, I believe, can go on this program now. It really does open up to people in classes as well. I can remember when I was doing the class in US history at Williston, and Karen O'Neill, who was my teacher, who unfortunately is dead now, but she was an excellent teacher. And I remember her saying to me at the end of the year, it was so great to have an English person in the class, because you brought a different perspective to all the history that I was teaching, which of course they wouldn't have got from a pure American class only. So one could sort of play the opposite number, if you like, even though I might not have followed it. It's a bit like debating and playing something that you don't necessarily believe is correct, but you create the argument, and that's what she wanted. And so it was very, very exciting being involved in classes like that. And I think that I hope that schools like Williston actually are still partaking in the ESU exchange program, because the students, and not just the students who go on it, but the students who are actually at the school, benefit so much from it by having different nationalities involved.
So it does sound like the environment of being at a boarding school, especially with international students, in a school like Williston that always has us asking lots of questions of ourselves and the world and history. It sounds like that gave us a very different perspective going forward into college or wherever we went into than perhaps we would have had if we'd just gone to a local public high school.
Well,
To me, there was, I think it's just exposure, because my first 2 years of high school was in a public school in a city that was multi-ethnic. And my two closest friends, one was Greek and one was Armenian. And then I came to Northampton, and there we had a gal from Japan, one from Samoa, one from England, one from Venezuela. So it was a very mixed class, even though we only had 16 in the class. And then when I began to work, I worked for a university medical school, and there again we had students from all over the world. And that just was a stimulus that I ended up being one of those people who traveled Europe on $5 a day in the youth hostels and so on for 6 months. I worked in England for 2.5 years. And I think it was just that early exposure to all the different ethnicities that got me on the road to travel.
Yeah, I just think Williston made everything possible. I mean, it really did for me. It's just, you know, nobody said you shouldn't do it, you can't do it, get on with it. And it was a really, really, really interesting experience.
Yes, I remember just towards the end of the summer term, and I always wanted to go to the Indianapolis 500. It's just one of the things I had to do. And I went in to see Philip Stevens, who was the headmaster. And I said, you know, I'd just like to get a bus to Indianapolis and come back again. To take 3 days off school. Could I do it? And he said, sure. He was so supportive. No, he wouldn't have let any of the Americans do that. But because I come all the way from the UK, he wasn't going to stop me going to the Indy 500.
Well, I want to go to the Isle of Man race.
That's dangerous. TT, the Isle of Man TT race.
That
yeah.
kills a few people, but yeah.
Well,
But,
I think this on this great note, I just want to be conscious of time. We've got, as we've noted several times, folks from the UK who are on, and we're keeping them up quite late. I know I would not be nearly as chipper if it were that hour here. So with that, I want to thank Anthony for a fascinating presentation and a beautiful presentation. I loved looking at all of those photographs. I am tempted to head off to Mongolia myself and ride some of those fabulous little Mongolian horses. And I think that it was a wonderful opportunity to hear from you about new ways of thinking of the world. I certainly have some new ways of thinking about mapping that I hadn't considered. So thank you for that. We will have this recording up on our Wildcat Hub, which you can find by going to the main website and just searching under the alumni section for the Wildcat Hub, where you can also find all of the recordings from all of the other presentations that we've been doing over this little bit of time. So I encourage you to go there. I encourage you to take a look at the events page. We have a full slate of events coming up through April. Those of you in reunion years, I ask you to be patient and stay tuned as we work on creating virtual reunion programming that will happen this June, as we look forward to 2022 as a chance to bring everyone back to campus. So with much gratitude, Anthony, thank you for tonight. Thank you,
thank you all very much.
Thanks.
Well, thanks for listening to me. I mean, I'd love to have listened to more of your stories. So maybe I should have been more interactive, but thank you so much. And thanks to Williston. So looking forward, and it's great to be reconnecting and say thanks to Williston. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thanks to everybody else.
Thank you, Joe.
And thanks for warming me up when I fell in the lake. So thank you. Yeah,
You got it.
thanks. Cheers. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you soon again, I hope. Thanks, Henry.